women are very privileged. What does that have to do with feminism?
How could they be privileged and be oppressed? I saw your thing with Andrew, and you love to do this thing where you're like, but my presupposition, like you've never examined why you believe that. Why do you believe women were oppressed? Women have always been privileged compared to men, always.
Women?
Throughout all of history, yes. Yes.
Come on.
Why do you think women weren't allowed to be educated? That was honestly never the case.
Welcome back to Rattlesnake TV, guys. In this video, we are going to be watching Rachel Wilson take on a bunch of male feminists.
No! God, please, no!
My absolute favorite people in the entire world. Now, there are some very interesting things brought up in this one, even some things that Rachel said that really surprised me. So get ready to have your feminist destroying tools sharpened. And with that, let's get into it.
Okay, the first topic is feminism was not a reaction to oppression.
Wait a minute.
What the hell? What the helly? What the helly, auntie?
Hi. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you too.
I guess a natural first question is what you think it arose from.
So the story most everyone's heard is that the reason feminism came about is because the evil patriarchy was oppressing the women, and they looked around one day and they went, oh no, we're being oppressed. We have to march and, you know, protest until we're equal. That's really not how it happened at all. It was more of an astroturfed social engineering project by radical revolutionaries and wealthy industrialists.
So I'm just going to be honest, I don't know enough about the history of feminism to say whether you're right or wrong. So I guess I kind of would rather just get to the meat of what I'm assuming you're saying,
Sure.
which is that feminism is inherently wrong, right? Because it wasn't founded by oppressed women, it was founded by some other, corrupt industry.
That, and people just have this assumption because of over 100 years of propaganda that women were historically oppressed, when I don't think that's accurate at all. I don't think there's any real evidence that women were oppressed compared to men, for instance.
So what about parts of our history where there were just objectively unequal rights, like voting, for instance?
So in the West, most men only gained the right to suffrage maybe a decade or so before women did. So people assume that as soon as we had, various forms of democracy, either in America or England, that all men could vote. That's not the case. It was a very small group of men. There were a lot of caveats. It depends on the time and place, but you had to either be a landowner, you had to have certain other various requirements. Right. Sometimes you had to pay a poll tax in order to be able to vote. So in England, for example, men only gained universal suffrage about a decade before women did.
But it's good that we made that progress, right?
I don't think so, but that's a separate prompt.
So here we see one of the common myths dismantled, that men throughout history were just voting away and women just never had the right to vote and men were just doing all the voting. But then you look around at Western countries and you look at the year in which men got the right to vote compared to women, and here's what we see. New Zealand, men and women enfranchised in the same year. Australia, both sexes at federal level by 1902. Finland, Norway, Denmark, and Iceland all granted full suffrage to vote to both sexes within the same legislative period. Netherlands had a 2-year gap. United Kingdom had a 10-year gap. And the US is a little bit more nuanced, which we will get into a bit later. But anyways, guys, before we move on, I need to introduce you to the fine sponsor of today's video, Ground News. Now, people are always asking me, Jake, how do you keep up with the news cycle, the ever-changing and extremely hectic news cycle? And the answer is my daily routine with Ground News. And one of the cool things I like to do, being in the very real country of Australia, is go to US politics and see what's happening over the pond. And this story is absolutely wild. Texas Democrats leave the state in bid to stop new congressional map, and Governor Abbott orders arrest of absent Texas House Democrats. And if I click into the story here, I can get a quick little summary of it, that the Texas House Democrats fled the state on the 4th of August, blocking a vote on maps that would give Republicans 5 extra US House seats. About 40 Democrats, including Jasmine Crockett and others, headed to Illinois before Greg Abbott warned Democrats could face removal and felony charges as their absences stalled the special legislative sessions, including flood relief and hemp bills. Now, if I go down the bottom here, I can see how the story is being reported left, center, and right. This is because Ground News compiles tens of thousands of different sources all in one place and does all of the heavy lifting for you. And guys, with all of this great value in mind, Ground News is also offering Rattlesnake TV listeners a huge 40% off the Vantage plan, which is what I use. All you have to do is hit those links below in the bio or pinned at the top of the comments, or hit the QR code on screen right here and join the tidal wave of people using Ground News. Over 500 and 30,000 followers on their Instagram alone. So great value there. And also, you're supporting the channel when you support Ground News with my links. So with that, let's get back to the clips.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I don't really know where to go from there then, because again, regardless of the circumstances by which feminism arose, is kind of indifferent to me. This is kind of similar to conversations like I had earlier, as far as like religion, for example, in society, right? It's more about the effects of it. And so regardless of the circumstances of how feminism arose, I think that the effects of it are probably advantageous.
I think the effects are deeply disadvantageous to both men and women. And I think women, if your concern is for women, we were better off prior to our liberation from the evil patriarchy. If you look at every metric that we have to assess women's happiness and well-being in modern times, it's lower than it was prior to when they started tracking this around the 1960s.
So I think there's a problem with the data tracking there, right? I don't know this figures specifically, but I mean, you know, we have a lot less horses in our military than we also did back in like the 1800s, right? So
sure.
I think that...
Well, let me ask you, what do you think it did for women? Why do you think, or for anyone, what do you think the advantages are? Why was it good?
Well, I think specifically just giving equal footing and opportunity to women, which I don't think is even entirely fulfilled at this point. But I'm sure that I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the traditional, you know, female role.
What opportunities did they not have?
Well, voting for one. But, you know, even in the workplace,
men
right?
couldn't vote either for the most part.
Yeah, and we fixed it, right? So I think that this is, you know, just because it was a wrong before that for men doesn't mean that it still was unequal.
So do you think that we would have the welfare state without female voters? Do you think the welfare state is a good thing?
I don't understand the question. I apologize.
So would we have massive entitlement spending? Would we have food stamps? Would we have open borders and all these perks for immigrants coming in where they're getting free housing and healthcare and food if it weren't for female voters?
I think you still would. I don't think female voters necessarily have to sway those things, but I also...
The data says that overwhelmingly they are the most reliable voting bloc for all types of entitlements, especially open borders and immigration.
If you go back, though, historically, right, and again, I didn't know the topic, so I don't have any literature to like literally support this, but women had a lot of influence in the House, even when they couldn't vote, right?
Exactly.
So, but we gave the ability to women to express their own independent votes. They are a vote. And so if, let's just say you're right, that women are a major proponent for, you know, policies we see in immigration, who cares? They're still a part of our populace. They get to have a say on this.
If you're a woman and you're living in New York City or other places where there's tons of illegal immigration and you're now being subjected to disproportional amounts of violence that you weren't subjected to before.
That's not true.
Okay.
No,
go ahead and substantiate that.
Yeah, so immigrants, illegal immigrants specifically, if you obviously remove the illegal part of the immigration, literally just commit crimes at lower rates than national.
So you think
citizens.
that all the Mexican gangs...
Okay, so this is just a concrete fact. In the US, women consistently show stronger support for government programs like welfare, social spending, and more open immigration policies. Recent polls show about 65% of women back expanding healthcare and social benefits as compared to about 50% of men. And the number is even greater amongst young women, black women, and Latina women. Around 70% in each group. Women tend to vote Democratic at least 10 to 15 points higher than men, helping to elect the candidates that are in favor of increased social spending and less restrictive border immigration policies. On immigration, nearly 60% of women support a path to citizenship as compared to less than half of men.
If feminism wasn't a response to oppression, why the hell does feminism exist?
I'll tell you why. There was a small group of radical revolutionaries who felt that the current system prior to this that we had through all of history was inherently oppressive to women because they felt that women and men were equal, that they're basically the same, they just have different reproductive organs, right? And that's really the only difference. They should be anything a man could do, a woman should be doing. This is a very arbitrary stance to take, and if you look historically at what rights men and women had, I think you could argue men were more oppressed than women prior even to feminism.
Seriously?
Yes, 100%.
Men were, in what way? How are men more oppressed than women?
Well, women haven't ever been conscripted to go fight and die in wars, and especially prior to feminism, that was a really brutal thing. About 80% of men historically have ended up not, well, no, it's 60% of men historically have never been able to reproduce. They've never had the opportunity, whether it's because they died young as cannon fodder, couldn't get a wife, weren't selected to be married. Women, all you have to do is be fertile, and you're going to have progeny. You're never going to be sent to the front lines in a war that you don't want to fight in. They don't have to work in coal mines. They don't have to do the dirty, dangerous jobs that men have to do.
Women are very privileged. What does that have to do with feminism and how it came about?
You can't claim that women are oppressed and also claim that they're privileged.
Definitely were. Do you disagree?
How could they be privileged and be oppressed?
Wait.
So women are oppressed or women are privileged? You actually can't have it both ways here. I mean, if you want to say that things aren't perfect, and in this specific example, historically, women were given the right to vote a little bit later than men, and in your worldview, you think that's a negative thing, then build that case. But if you concede on the fact that women didn't have to be conscripted and die in wars, they didn't have to do the hard labor, and also they've always had a far easier path to reproduction, only 40% of men who have ever existed have actually reproduced, just to name a few arguments, and there are many more, then you cannot say that women are oppressed as a blanket statement. Because if this is a gendered argument, then you would have to make the case that women were oppressed or women are oppressed and men were not oppressed or men are not oppressed, which is just an absurd argument to make considering the aforementioned details. Let's finish this portion off.
Do you disagree that women were never oppressed? Do
Yes,
you agree?
I agree.
You agree? Wait, I'm sorry. Let me rephrase that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you believe that women have never been oppressed?
Yes. I believe that women were never.
Seriously?
Yes, as a
How
whole
could you
group.
possibly
Who
think to
oppressed
believe
them?
that?
Who oppressed them? Listen,
half the
I saw your
men.
thing with Andrew, and you love to do this thing where you're like, but my presupposition, like you've never examined why you believe that. Why do you believe women were oppressed? You tell me why you believe that.
This is literally a historical fact.
It's not a historical
not
fact.
having the right to vote. The women are oppressed currently in this world, right?
Oh, explain.
Right? Less
I'd
so.
love to know how.
What do you mean?
Any
they can't
example?
drive. They can't go out without.
They can't drive?
In certain countries, absolutely, women are oppressed. Are you
Where?
literally denying that women are not oppressed in this world? In certain
Well, we're talking
obviously
about
in America, right?
America.
I'm an American.
Right.
Women have equal rights, and I think this is a great society. But to suggest that women have not been oppressed in the past
Where
in this country,
Where in the West? Yeah, in this country.
in the past in this country, and throughout the world currently, to suggest that they're not oppressed is absurd.
Show me an example of American women. That's not an argument. Show me an example of American women ever being oppressed comparatively to men.
There's a time in this country where women can't vote.
There was time in this country where men couldn't vote.
So
The
what is that?
majority
all
of men could not vote.
That is not a retort. That is just saying, well, that's true. You basically just said that's true, but. So you basically agree with me. I asked you.
How were men oppressing women if those men themselves didn't have the right to vote either?
Me to say,
so men with no voting rights oppressed women with no voting rights?
No. You asked me to give you an example of when women were oppressed, and I did. And then
By whom?
Your response was just that, yeah, men were oppressed too.
Yeah. So how
agree
could
with me.
feminism
Cool.
be a reaction to oppression
How
by
is
men?
it not?
Because they weren't oppressed. Women have always been privileged compared to men. Always.
Women?
Throughout all of history, yes.
Oh,
yes.
come on.
Guys, just quickly, I wanted to let you know that if you did want to smash the like button, every single like button smashed is actually one smash of the patriarchy. And every single person who subs to the channel will be an ally in the fight against patriarchy. So if you guys wanted to like and sub and join the cause, I would be enormously grateful. Let's get back to it.
What do you mean, come on? Like I said, women don't have to. Women have never had to die in battle.
Go live in the Middle East and tell me that same thing. That's insane.
That you could argue that they're even privileged there comparatively to the men.
Stop. You don't believe that.
I do believe that. Absolutely. Where in the Middle East, and what are you talking about? Are you talking about the Taliban? Are you talking about Saudi Arabia? Saudi Arabia has become very progressive, and women there can work and they can drive.
Go to Afghanistan and tell me women are privileged.
Well, how are they not?
Stop it. This is a rhetorical question. Just asking the same question.
Who are you appealing to here?
The camera.
So if let's just grant you that the Taliban is an oppressive regime.
It's literally grant me that they're an oppressive regime? Seriously?
Well, you would have to take into account all the ways that men are also oppressed under the Taliban regime, which you could argue is much worse.
That, but that's not the point.
They are sent to fight and blow themselves up and die for things that they probably don't want to if they had the choice.
What about it?
But let's stick to America, because the topic was, it's more here. So in the United States, women have never been oppressed. Do you know that women have always had higher rates of literacy?
I mean, I know that they're not professional debaters, but I must point out the obvious here that, oh man, that's just a fact, is not an argument.
This is literally a historical fact.
It's not a historical fact.
Not having the right to vote.
And he already did concede his entire argument, by the way, when he said that women have had and do have many privileges, meaning that they have privileges that men don't have.
Women are very privileged.
And significant privileges, and that men have never had throughout history. I mean, when it comes to protecting your people from outside forces through war, they don't have to go and die. But they and the children are actually the primary beneficiaries of said protection. Furthermore, men make up the vast majority of workers in resource-heavy industries like mining, energy, and construction fields that drive the procurement and development of raw materials. Meanwhile, women and children are the primary recipients of the benefits through public services, welfare programs, and household consumption. In short, men largely produce the resources, women and children disproportionately consume or receive them.
Greetings.
Hello.
Hello. Can you please repeat the question?
So the prompt is feminism or women's liberation was not a reaction to oppression by men.
Could it can be? Could it can be? Could it can be?
Could it can be?
Could it can be?
What?
Could the oppression be of a different form that led to this revolution? This revolution?
Do you ever laugh on people with a retardation?
That's logically possible, but you'd have to give me an example or demonstration of how you think that's the case.
Okay. How about the failures of institutions that has occurred? For example, the separation of church and state, the failure of the church to educate these women has allowed them to be victimized by those who obviously desire divisions.
Why do you think women weren't allowed to be educated?
Well, I do believe they should have been educated.
They were educated. I was actually just about to tell the guy who sat down before you, women have historically always had higher rates of literacy and high school graduation for as long as we've been tracking in this country, which is about 1790. So we're talking about the early founding of the nation. Women were actually more educated than men. And part of the reason for this is women were the ones that educated children, and they weren't sent off to, work in infrastructure jobs or farming at, 12 or 14 years old the way that men were. They weren't having to go and die in battle or anything like that. So women being at home got more education than most men historically.
So another myth that you hear all the time from these femoids is that women weren't allowed to be educated. And this is actually just a blatant lie. But what took me by surprise here and what I didn't know is just how long women have been on par or ahead of men in terms of literacy and education. I actually thought that they were able to be educated, but the rates of education were much higher for men historically than they were for women. And this is just not true. I went and reached out to Rach and asked what she meant here, and there are a few very interesting things to note. With the voting part, the USA, being the United States of America, was not always as united or was not always as centralized in its power. Started off with 13 colonies and built up to 50 states, so the right to vote was not universal. In some states, women could vote before the 19th, and in some places, women couldn't even vote after. Black men couldn't vote until far later. So it depended completely on the state. So for most of US history, up until a few years before the 19th Amendment, most men also did not have the right to vote. Most states had other restrictions as well, such as having to own land or having to take a literary test or polling taxes, and there were more stringent age restrictions and other things, which is a way better system, by the way. And then on education, the US did not actually start tracking statistics until about 1870. But there are examples from around that time where in some places women had higher literacy rates than men. And after 1870, and particularly after 1900, women started to really take over in terms of literary and education rates as compared to men. Check out this chart that Rach sent me from the National Center for Education that shows numbers of high school graduates all the way back to 1870. Although the data is sparse, it does show that females were graduating at a higher rate than men consistently. And although it's not exactly comprehensive data, what it does show is that there was certainly no big effort to hold women back and to oppress women and to make sure that they couldn't get educated. And in fact, in many cases, they were more educated and more literate than men. And this is partly, as Rachel mentioned, because it wasn't really practical for men to be going and getting educated because they would go off and work in the mines or in farming. So all this to say that women were not barred from education in the United States. And today, that trend continues. Women are outpacing men in terms of high school diplomas and also in terms of graduating university or college. So I mean, while the conversation is always about how oppressed women are and how they've been held back, when it comes to reading, writing, and finishing high school, they have been ahead for generations. Let's finish this off.
Understood. Now, could that have been corrupted from the beginning? For example, would be beginning, middle, and end of a story. Education begins at a format where you began, depending on the topic that you have a desire to learn, or at least you should have been taught. Could that have been manipulated form of education that has occurred and people weren't aware of it, and that in due time this revolution, feminism, was just an expected outcome that could have been prevented but never was addressed?
I really don't know what you mean by that.
What I mean is someone lied to these women.
Oh, yes,
whether
absolutely.
it be themselves or a combination of both, and or
yes,
another third party that desired their outcomes, just using them as pawns to meet the ends
I think
of their
that's definitely true, and that's one of my evidences for the fact that feminism was not some kind of grassroots reaction to abusive oppression by the evil patriarchy. So
okay, so evil patriarchy. Is there an opposite of evil patriarchy, which is a good patriarchy?
I think we've always had a benevolent patriarchy. I think it's been framed that patriarchy, which just means rule by the father, has always been some kind of evil and nefarious attempt to just keep women down and make them into slaves, when that was honestly never the case.
Would you agree that is the role, rules and regulation of the father to guard and protect his daughter, and obviously his wife, who's being the bearer of his children?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what if that father got corrupt?
Well, there's always going to be some corruption in hierarchies. It's unavoidable. That doesn't mean the whole hierarchy is bad.
Okay, so at what point will the whole thing be corrupt?
I think that that's kind of a slippery slope type of a fallacy where it'd be pretty hard, or a continuum fallacy where it may be hard for you to like prove a point. But my contention is that there was no overall plot, no overall nefarious oppression of women by men as a whole.
Okay, so Rachel mentioned here the slippery slope fallacy, and that's exactly what has happened. The slippery slope fallacy is arguing that a relatively small first step will probably lead to a chain of related events that will lead to a usually negative outcome without actually showing the causal link. And this is something that is important to be aware of during these discussions. Liberals, and particularly feminists, will often use this when arguing against patriarchy. They will say, because there are some men here and here who are in power and who do bad things, therefore any male-dominated system ever will be inherently oppressive and bad. The logic goes that if a few men exploit authority, then any structure where men lead will inevitably lead to corruption, abuse, and inequality. But this leap obviously ignores the fact that bad actors and bad individuals exist in all systems. It's a rhetorical move that jumps from isolated incidents to sweeping condemnation. So anyways, guys, that's about all I've got for you today. Don't forget to check out Ground News below. And remember, if you do support them, you are supporting the channel directly. Their links will be down there in the bio, top of the comments. If you'd like to like the video, subscribe to the channel, you can do so. And if you'd like to watch another one, right here. Until next time, I'm Jake. This is RattlesnakeTV, keeping you armed and dangerous.